Hi, I'm Nancy Windhart, and I'd like to welcome you back to this channel on animal and interspecies communication. In this video, I want to talk with you a little bit about thinking versus intuition, and how when we're working with learning to uncover and recover our natural ability to communicate telepathically with animals and with all life, it's really important for us to understand the difference between these two things and to learn how to differentiate when we're in our thinking mind versus when we're in our intuitive or telepathic receiving way of being. So, the first thing I want to say is that both of these ways of working and understanding and being in the world are important. And I often, with my students, use the analogy of a person with a broken leg. So, as two-leggeds, we need both legs to stand on, right? And what happens when we break a leg? We get put in a cast, and while we recover, that leg begins to atrophy. The muscles in that leg aren't working. And so once the leg is healed and the cast comes off, then the work is to strengthen the leg that was atrophied from disuse and make it strong again so that it's equal to the other leg. So we can kind of think about that analogy with thinking and intuition. Actually, we need both. And our thinking mind, well, it's not so useful in working to cultivate and recover our intuitive and telepathic ways of knowing and receiving. It is very useful for us as humans in many ways. Your thinking mind is what allowed you to click on the link for this video on whatever device you're using and figure out how to do that. Our thinking mind is what allows us to organize our lives, to show up at agreed on places and times, to remember what we need to buy at the grocery store. All of those things are really important. And actually, as humans, it would be very hard for us to function without the thinking mind. So, although it kind of gets a bad rap sometimes, I think that it's important for us to recognize that our thinking mind is valuable and important for certain things. What it's not useful for is in working with cultivating the development of our atrophied, for most of us, intuitive, receptive way of knowing. Sometimes we think of this as a sixth sense. We might call it telepathy. We might call it intuition. It can include all of those things. And so what's happened for most of us in most of our human cultures is that for a lot of reasons, which are beyond the scope of this video to go into, those ways of being have been discounted and allowed to kind of weaken and become dormant. And it's important to remember that they don't go away, but they simply are not used. And so when something is not used, like that broken leg, it weakens and it becomes dormant. And so what we're doing is really wanting to cultivate that side by strengthening it. And that doesn't mean that we're going to, chop off the other leg, our thinking leg, to continue with that analogy. Rather, we're working to develop our intuitive way of being so that it becomes strong as our habitual thinking way of being. So both are important. We need both. And ultimately, if both can work together, that's going to be our strongest way of being, where we're using both. We're using our human capacity to think, to plan, to figure things out, to understand things, to research, to study, to develop, to create, all of those things. And we're using our intuitive, receptive, telepathic ways of knowing. And so let's talk a little bit about what those different things are. What we want to do is to cultivate the capacity to recognize which mode we're in and when, and which mode is useful and when. And when we're working with animal and interspecies communication, we're primarily working with the intuitive, telepathic, receptive side. And so we want to cultivate the ability to recognize what that feels like. And for each of us, that's going to be kind of individual, but we can recognize what those ways of knowing and receiving are. And then it's also important for us to recognize what the thinking feels like, because where we can get into trouble is that we mistake our thinking minds for what is coming directly from an animal or another being. And when we're not aware that we're thinking is when we can really go off track. As long as we're aware of it, it's not a problem. We can just recognize, oh, that's the thinking mind, and I'm going to set that aside while I listen to this other way of being and this other way of knowing. So, some of the qualities that we might notice when we're in our thinking minds are a feeling of mental pressure. There's a feeling of kind of trying to figure things out. And you might notice that you get a little bit tight in the body and you kind of clench up like I'm doing now, and you lean forward, you might furrow your brow, and you're working hard. And can you notice, even, as I'm saying those words and imagining what that's like, my body's getting tense, and I'm kind of leaning, and there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of intensity. And so one of the simple practices that we can use to kind of relax that is simply to remember to sit back and open up and to relax our bodies down into the earth. Thinking also can have a kind of very rapid fire kind of feeling to it. And sometimes you'll hear this described as the monkey mind, a mind that's very active and jumping around a lot and busy doing things and thinking about things and figuring things out. And so there's this pressured and kind of active quality to it. And so you can kind of notice when you're in that state of being. And sometimes we can be in a thinking state of mind even when we're in a very creative way of being too. So for example, if we're a writer and we're writing something, we're thinking, but our creativity is also online. That has a different quality, but we're still working with that part of our being that is thinking. So when we're working with our intuitive or telepathic, receptive way of being, particularly thinking about what I talk about mostly on this channel, which is working with understanding animals and other species and communicating intuitively with them, it has a different quality. So, first of all, we cultivate stillness, and just that cultivation of quiet and a receptive, present state of being will settle down a lot of that overactive thinking. So there's a quality of receptivity, of listening, of quiet. When the communication and the intuitive knowings come in, they also tend to have certain qualities, and you'll learn to recognize these the more that you work with them. They're often fast. It will come in as a flash of insight or intuition or communication or awareness or general knowing. Oftentimes, it will be surprising or unexpected, something that you were not aware of, or a different perspective that you wouldn't have imagined in your human way of being. It may also have a quality of being quite like fresh or new or something unexpected. Maybe you're going about your life and you have a sudden flash. Oh, I need to call this friend, and something's going on with that friend, and you've just paid attention to that sudden flash or that intuition that let you know that you needed to make a phone call. Our intuitive and telepathic ways of being are also often complete and whole and multisensory. So they're not fragmented, they're not pieced out. And they often are received through our body. So we can, think of even some of the metaphors and the figures of speech that we have in our human language that point to this. For example, feeling like the hair stand up on the back of your neck, right? Sensing something behind you, or she has eyes on the back of her head, that kind of expression, right? But noticing that we feel it in the body. I have a gut feeling. I got chills when I walked into that room. I had a gut feeling that I shouldn't turn down that street, right? Whatever it is, these are ways of knowing that come from our intuitive and receptive way of being. It's the sixth sense, again, as we talk about. So when we're working with animals and other beings and working on recovering this natural and intuitive way of relating to them and communicating with them, we can pay attention to, are we trying to figure things out? Are we trying to understand and make it fit and getting kind of tight and pressured about it? Or are we relaxed and open and receptive and allowing that free exchange of information to take place? When we're new at this, when we're first recovering these abilities, and when they've kind of gone dormant from not being used, not being recognized, not being honored, it's really important to do what I often call watering the plant. And sometimes I also talk about this as praise the puppy. So if you have a seedling and it's just growing and you're wanting to nourish it and nurture it, you're going to water it, you're going to fertilize it, you're going to make sure that it's in the right container, you're going to make sure that it's getting just the right amount of sunlight, that it's not getting too hot, that it's not getting too cold, that it's in a really nourishing and supportive environment. Or if you have a new puppy that you're working with training, you want to praise the puppy when you're working with house training and they go outside for the first time and you make it just the biggest deal in the world. You praise the puppy, you nourish that young being that is growing and learning and expanding. And so we want to do the same thing with ourselves. A lot of times people come to this and they approach it with this kind of, oh, I want to strengthen my weaknesses and I want to, I want to learn this thing and I'm going to work hard and I'm going to, kind of berate myself when I get things wrong. And that just doesn't work. What we want to do is create the conditions for these abilities to grow and to flourish. So what does that mean? It means that we pay attention, first of all. If we've got a young one that we're nourishing, we want to pay attention to that young one. And so we can treat ourselves that way too. We pay attention to those little glimmers of intuition, those first glimmerings of communication, those first things that come in that we may not even be sure of, but we want to say yes to it. We want to nourish it. We want that to flourish and to be fertilized. Pay attention and don't discount those things. Oftentimes in our culture, we are, if something happens where our intuition is confirmed, we're kind of trained to say, oh, well, that was just a coincidence. Well, isn't that interesting that I was just thinking of that person and then they called? Or isn't it interesting that I had that feeling to not turn down that street and then later I found that there was a bad accident at that intersection? Oh, what a coincidence. Well, actually, it's not a coincidence. It's information that you received, that you, hopefully paid enough attention to act upon. So you want to notice and not discount. Sometimes it's helpful to write these things down or to make note of them in a way where you can go back and review them, and that will help to build your confidence as you're practicing this. Stay open to those intuitive awarenesses as you go through your daily life, whatever it is. Just stay open, expect them, and don't be surprised when they happen. We want to, again, fertilize and nourish that part of ourselves that has become dormant so it can kind of strengthen and grow and come out of the closet and come more online so that it can be developed to be equally as strong as the part of ourselves that we're more used to using, which is our thinking mind. So those are just some tips for you to kind of pay attention to in your daily life. Notice what shows up for you. Notice those intuitive nudges. Notice the feelings, the senses that you get from your animal friends. Start to pay attention and cultivate that. And you'll find that the more you cultivate that awareness, the more that you'll start to notice that that information is actually there all the time, but we just have been trained out of really paying attention to it. So I hope that this video is helpful. If you're interested in more information about animal and interspecies communication, developing your intuitive abilities, learning to sense and feel and work with energy, you can find a lot more information on my website, nancywindhart.com. And thank you for joining me here. If you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to this channel, and that really helps this channel to grow and reach more people who are interested in these topics and are interested in learning to listen to and hear and understand all of the beautiful beings that we share our planet with. Thank you.